Thank you. What a civilized-looking audience. I do quite a lot of talking, and obviously, you know, sometimes you get abuse, right? And there was one time I was on the stage, and the audience, they started by heckling me, shouting at me, and then they started throwing food at me, and then some of them rushed the stage and started trying to hit me with their tiny fists. And I said to my 6-year-old son, if you think I'm going to do a puppet show at your next birthday party, you are wrong. So, yes, I'm hoping this will be calmer and easier. But let's jump into it, shall we? No? The other clicker. No? The other button. Can I ask you, please, to move on to the next slide, because this is, you can read the headline, but I'm sure you've all been given these lovely sort of buttons to practice your, you know, hand squeezing and so forth. Okay, I kind of need the picture. Okay, right, tell you what, the picture's going to come up, but before it does, I'll start talking. So, I once went into a library in North Korea, and the librarian there was very keen on showing off their technology. They had a little railway track that you could order a book, and the books would come out from the library and be delivered to you. And I said, okay, well, that's very impressive. Ah, we have a picture. Great. So, so the books were supposed to come along this little library track. But I said to the librarian, the North Korean librarian, what books do people like reading in your country? And he said, well, there are many great books, many excellent books written by the great leader Kim Il-sung and the dear leader Kim Jong-il, and his son Kim Jong-un wasn't yet alive at that point. So it wasn't yet known. And I said, okay, that's great. I'm sure that the great leader and the dear leader have written many excellent books, but are there any other authors that people, you know, read? And the librarian went silent. He could not admit that good ideas came from anyone apart from the ruling family. And that is the fundamental reason why the map, why the view of the Korean peninsula at night from a satellite looks like that. Here you've got North Korea, you've got South Korea. That's the lights that you can see in South Korea indicate economic activity, restaurants, electricity, fun. Up in the north, you see almost nothing, a tiny little blob of light for Pyongyang, the capital. And it is the fact that North Korea suppresses ideas from the outside, that it doesn't let people talk about what they want to talk about. That is the principal reason why South Korea is 20 to 30 times richer than North Korea. Not 20 to 30% richer, 20 to 30 times richer. Despite the fact that these two countries share 5,000 years of culture and history and were only divided in 1950. If anyone ever tells you that free speech doesn't matter, you can show them this map. And the people who run North Korea, the autocratic regime there, they are right when they believe that free speech is a threat to their kind of regime. It's an interesting fact that one of the principal things that causes people to defect from North Korea, to to run away from the country, risking death, risking being shot to get out of the country. One of the things that makes them do that almost all the defectors say they've done, is that they have watched soap operas, they have watched television shows smuggled into the country from South Korea. And what they see on these television shows is not just that ordinary families in South Korea are much richer, although they do see that. They also get a sense of freedom of thought. And the way one defector put it to us was this. She said, watching a South Korean soap, the thing that amazed her was that you had men and women on television saying that they loved each other. She said, in a North Korean television show, you can only say that you love the great leader, Kim Il-sung. So, as I say, this is why I think freedom of expression matters. Now, can I make this work? No. Yes. Wonderful, wonderful. So about a decade ago, I wrote a cover story for The Economist on free speech. This is not that. We had a picture of a man with a padlock on his mouth. And at the time, we were talking about two threats. One was the assassin's veto, the idea that some people have that if someone says something that you find offensive, you can kill them, okay? And the prime example of this was Salman Rushdie. I interviewed him last year, and 30 years after he had written a book which some people believe was insulting to Islam, 30 years afterwards, a man who wasn't even born at the time he wrote the book, rushed him on a stage and stabbed him multiple times, blinding him in one eye. When I talked to him last year, one of his main observations was that the people who wanted him dead had no sense of humor, and that was the mark of the worst repressive regimes around the world. The other milder threat we talked about in that cover was what's called the heckler's veto. And this is less severe, but much more common. There are possibly nearly 40% of students at American universities believe that it is acceptable if a speaker is saying things that they don't agree with to shout them down and prevent them from speaking. In Europe now, something like 40% of people believe that people are afraid to say what they really think because they fear the consequences. They fear that people will try to get them to lose their jobs. This is new, and this is bad. But I don't think it's the biggest threat to freedom of expression. The biggest threat comes from governments. And the biggest change is not in the dictatorships like North Korea, although they are still every bit as oppressive and censorious as they were before. The change has come in countries that call themselves democracies, that have started to take on some of the techniques, not all, but some of the techniques of authoritarian regimes in shutting down the press. They don't usually lock people up. They don't usually kill people for writing things critical of the government, but they do try to change the incentives. They try to make it so that it is really difficult to be a critical journalist and really easy to be one who supports the government. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But one of the observations we made here is about the motivation, about the kinds of governments that want to crack down on media freedom. And it is fundamentally the governments that have something to hide. That was the topic of this cover, okay? And if we can go to the next slide, I'll say what I mean there. Yes, okay. Now I'm only going to show you two graphs. Sorry, I am from The Economist. We do graphs. But this is a really interesting one, okay? The point of this graph, this graph, is that censorship enables corruption. That when governments can get rid of the critical scrutiny of proper journalists asking hard questions, that makes it easier for them to conceal the bad things that they are doing, especially when it comes to stealing taxpayers' money or shifting contracts to their friends, which is actually a form of stealing taxpayers' money. And it's kind of intuitively obvious that there would be a relationship, but that relationship is stronger than many people realize. So I will explain this graph. We looked at 180 countries, so that's nearly all of them, apart from some little Pacific islands, over 80 years. And we used something called Granger causality to establish causality, which I can explain later if you like. What we found is that a rise in, or a diminution in media freedom is an extremely accurate predictor that in the subsequent years, corruption will get worse. Okay? Now, it's on a time lag. It doesn't happen immediately. But when you shut down the critical press, you make it easier to get away with theft. And it takes about 4 years on average for half of that effect to be felt, for about half of the increase in corruption to happen. So you can do it now. You can crack down on the press now, and the voters will not necessarily detect, they will not necessarily see the increase in corruption until after the next election. The other thing we've noticed is that the causality works in the other direction as well. There is a feedback loop. So it's not just that a diminution of press freedom predicts a rise in corruption. It is also true that a rise in corruption predicts more censorship in the future. And the reason for that, we think, is because when rulers are more corrupt, when they have more things to hide, when there are more people in the system who have stolen more money and have more things to hide, they have a greater incentive to shut down scrutiny of what they are doing. This is a really strong finding, and it's what we call less scrutiny, more looting. It's something that, really should be part of the armory of arguing about why free press matters. Now, I'm going to give you one more graph. It's the last one, I promise. Now, this is slightly complicating matters, but the other thing that is very strongly connected with an increase in censorship is the rise of populism. Now, the measure we take here is from VDEM, the Swedish institute, and it's saying, so populists tend to be politicians who claim to be the authentic representatives of the authentic people, who suggest that all the things that have gone wrong in the country are the fault of others, like immigrants or Muslims or woke people, or just a group that you can blame everything for. And so they tend to be people who, and this is the measure we use, they're politicians who don't give sort of reasoned justifications for their policies. They don't say, we are going to reduce red tape around buildings so that we can build more houses so that housing will be cheaper. They say, the reason houses are expensive is because the immigrants have taken all the houses, right? So they give angry justifications for what they do. And these same politicians tend to be very keen on undermining the institutions that check governments, that stop politicians from doing whatever they want. They want to weaken the courts, they want to weaken the bureaucracy, they want to make sure that it's harder for anyone to stop them from doing what they want to do. This is the Viktor Orban approach to governance. And so what we find is that when politicians move towards more emotional, less reasoned ways of talking, that is an extremely good predictor that they are going to crack down on the press. And so these three things They don't just happen together, they all reinforce each other. Okay? Censorship makes it easier for politicians to be corrupt. Being corrupt gives politicians an incentive to crack down on the press. And being populists, being the kind of people who say, blame the foreigners and please remove all the checks on my power, those guys are often at the heart of this. So it all reinforces each other. Right, no more graphs. Let's have the next picture, please. So there has been a big change since about 2014 in the level of press freedom in the world. You can look at different measures of it. I think Reporters Sans Frontières, RSF, Reporters Without Borders, by their measure, since 2014, the average level of media freedom in the world has got worse on their scale from roughly the level that the United States is at today to roughly the level that, gosh, I'm totally blanking, somewhere, come back to me, Serbia, that Serbia is today. So it's gone from those two, that's a big change. VDEM, on their measure of press freedom, they say that since 2004, the world has gone from roughly the level of average media freedom that you have in Mexico to roughly the level that you have in Hindu nationalist India. Again, that's a significant decline. And if you talk to the heads of these organizations, the head of RSF, the heads of the Committee to Protect Journalists, they will tell you that the big change is backsliding in countries that claim to be democracies. And these are the techniques that they use. Firstly, there's the rhetorical technique. So you have a lot of leaders who are starting to say, not, I disagree with the criticism that has been made of me, not, I think such and such a journalist is biased. They are saying things like, Argentina's president said, we don't hate journalists enough. He leads crowds chanting, we don't hate journalists enough. We have, in India, critical journalists are known as, by the ruling party, as prostitutes, as in, prostitutes with the press. Okay? In America, President Donald Trump has described his critics, such as the New York Times, as treasonous. He has said that they are traitors. They have put up a thing on the White House website, a list of dishonest journalists who do media malpractice with their names and their pictures. And the worry about this, the worry about the rhetoric, is that it gives permission to some of the supporters of these parties to find out where the journalists live and to harm them. And we are particularly seeing this with women around the world. There was a UNESCO report which showed that 3/4 of the female journalists in the world have received abuse online, which includes not just regular abuse, but in India you have pictures of often Muslim female journalists who are put up AI altered so that they're wearing fewer clothes, and then they auction them. They say, who would like to buy this journalist as a sex slave? That's bad enough. 42% of female journalists around the world have endured actual in-person, not just online, in-person harassment, threats of violence, and occasionally violence itself. This creates an atmosphere of fear where it is simply much more unpleasant for your personal life if you want to be an honest journalist rather than one who sucks up to the government. So that's the first one, rhetorical. Then there's the legal one. Now, in democracies, they all have laws saying that they guarantee the freedom of the press. So you can't, they can't just pull out laws saying, you can't write criticism of the government. But they have found workarounds. And one of the workarounds they've found is the use of civil law. So rather than saying you can't criticize, you get very rich people who are friends of the government or ministers within the government who may also be rich to sue them for malicious libel or something like that. And the purpose often is not to win, it is to exhaust them. It is to make them have to pay so many legal bills that they cannot keep working, and just to keep doing it. And Donald Trump does this as well. He has sued numerous organizations, sometimes for billions of dollars, for saying things about him which were both true and in the public interest to report. And the idea is to intimidate. And if you're the New York Times, you can survive that. If you're a smaller individual reporter, it may be much harder. So that's the legal thing. And then, of course, you go after them with laws that are not related to journalism. So by an amazing coincidence, the chap who's in charge of the main critical media website in Serbia has been investigated for tax fraud 30 times that he can remember. He spends 5 days a month in court defending himself. And that is absolutely exhausting. They also do other nastier things to him. So the security services, or someone, has released photos of this chap, the editor of Crick. Firstly, faked photos of him standing next to mafia bosses to make it look like he's a crook, and then hacked photos from his phone showing his private life inside his bedroom with him with no clothes on, things that you don't actually want other people to be seeing all around the world. They want to make clear the consequences of criticizing the government is that your life will be worse. And then finally, there's the economic tools. And these matter a lot, partly because the internet has made it harder for a lot of news organizations to survive financially, but more fundamentally, because the power imbalance between governments and newspapers is that governments have a lot of money. They also have, like, tycoons who have a lot of money who want to be friends with the government. So the economic tools that you can use, government advertising very often will go only to the pro-government media, and companies that are thinking of advertising with critical media, someone from the government rings them up and says, I don't think you want to be supporting them. And because they want to get the next contract to build a road or a power station, they think, okay, we'll play it safe and not go near them. We were talking to the CEO of Tempo, one of the Indonesian papers, and he said that because they did investigative work, advertisers would not touch them. And also someone, again, we don't know who, but possibly the security services, possibly someone else, would make sure that all the journalists knew that they were being watched. So you would get these mysterious, lots of deliveries of pizza to the journalists' houses. Occasionally, a severed pig's head, but mostly things like pizza, just saying, we know where you live, we're watching you. So the other economic tool that you can use, and we see this a lot in Turkey, we've seen it in Hungary, is where you have an oligarch who is friendly with the ruling party, and there's a critical media outlet. And first off, the government pushes the critical media outlet close to bankruptcy with tax audits and lawsuits. Then the oligarch comes in and buys it. And he doesn't care about making money out of the media outlet. The point is to please the people with power so that you get public contracts in the future. We saw that with I assume that is the reason for the takeover of Can Holding, one of the main TV outlets in Turkey, which happened in September. And you see it all over Hungary and many other places. So those are the three tools. Can I have the next slide, please? Let's try and put it all together into one package. When all these tools are being wielded at once, it enormously skews the incentives that journalists face. So India, it's a democracy. It's a free country. The Constitution guarantees freedom of expression. There are actually a lot of journalists in India, a lot of people reading newspapers there. There's a vibrant culture of debate. But the current ruling party, And this is a big change from 10 years ago. This was not true under the previous ruling party. But under the current ruling party, who believe that they're on a divine mission to remake India as a Hindu nation with some pesky minorities, just about tolerated sometimes. So, supposing you're a critical journalist in India. I went and talked to a guy called Abhinandan Sekri, who runs something called News Laundry, which is a very critical news website. And he said, okay, so I have faced, what was it? I think it was about 25 notices of tax audits. He's had police come into his office and interrogate him, sometimes detaining him for half a day, sometimes for 18 hours, every time going through his phone and his laptop, which they're not allowed to seize, taking everything they can out, finding everyone he's been talking to. That's an important thing. When people think that journalists cannot keep your contacts with them secret because they are going to get hacked, whether it's with Pegasus software or with illegal searches, they don't want to talk to journalists, right? I remember a quote from one person I was talking to who said, after the Pegasus spyware came out, one of his contacts said, now I know why my husband was fired from his job. It's because Pegasus knows that you were talking to me. So in India, this guy, Abhinandan Sekri, he is constantly getting this harassment from the state. He's constantly finding that pro-ruling party papers, newspapers even, are suing him for defamation. They have very deep pockets. And he said to me, the only reason he is able to survive as a critical journalist is because he has an almost uncopyable combination of advantages. Okay? He is single. He does not have a family for anyone to threaten. He comes from a privileged background, so he knows from his university days lawyers who will defend him pro bono for nothing. He's a Hindu. He's a high caste Hindu. It's just that much less likely that the police are going to torture him. He's not interested in money. He lives simply. And he says his private life is the most boring private life in the world. When you search his laptop, there is nothing there except evidence that he's a workaholic. But most journalists don't have these advantages. Most journalists are not high caste. Lots of people do have things to hide. Lots of people have families. And he says that the big threat that you see to freedom of expression in India is not focused on him, bad though his story is. It's the little guys in the provinces facing some local power broker. He cited the example of one guy who did an expose of mafia connected with local politicians who were stealing sand for massive construction projects and causing riverbanks to fall in and people's houses to become unstable. And the guy was arrested, and somehow or other, petrol came to be on top of him and he was set alight, and the police said that he killed himself. No serious person believes that. But those are the kind, when you have an environment, when the ruling from the top, when the direction from the top is that journalists are prostitutes or traitors or enemies of the people, that's the kind of thing that can happen. Let me have the next slide, please. So this is a cover we did about America recently. I think the first thing to say about America is that, and the way American media will report on, press freedom in America is that they will essentially argue that it's about to be snuffed out. It's not, okay? Donald Trump is an enemy of the free press, but the checks and balances in America are very large, You have 50 state governments that Donald Trump cannot tell what to do. You have a court system which he cannot tell what to do. You have very strong tradition of legal protections of the media in the First Amendment, which people take very seriously. And you have a very big and diverse market. There are lots and lots of media outlets. The New York Times is actually doing commercially better while Trump is in power because its readers are so keen to hear about the latest terrible things that he's been doing. So, although he undoubtedly would like to snuff out the media, yet still he talks to them a lot. You know, he will answer questions. Well, he will make noise in response to questions. He won't necessarily answer them. I don't know, does calling someone piggy count as answering the question? In a way. But the big effect of having someone like Trump in charge of America is on the rest of the world. So it used to be that the American State Department, with money that the American government barely notices because it's so small, would subsidize independent media in hundreds of countries around the world. It used to be that any time the leader of a party, of a country that needed some kind of favor from America was talking to the Americans, they would dread the time when the American president would say, "What about all those journalists you're locking up?" They would know that if they wanted to please the American government, they had to at least make a show of not imprisoning journalists. That has changed completely. He doesn't care. And we are hearing this from all over the world. There's a newspaper editor from Azerbaijan who said that the moment Trump came to power and the president of Azerbaijan realized that suddenly there was no cost to locking up journalists, he immediately locked up 100 journalists, which was basically the entire dissident media environment. And because of the things I've mentioned before, the imbalance of power, the imbalance of money, the abuse of laws that aren't supposed to be used this way, they would find it was difficult to get, food and feminine hygiene products to the arrested journalists in prison. And when they hired a local guy to try to bring these things to them, from the journalists in exile, that guy, the guy who was bringing the food and the sanitary products to the arrested journalists in prison, was arrested for smuggling money. So the effect that Trump is having on the world is principally by example. It's by saying that even the supposed beacon of media freedom around the world has a guy in charge who doesn't care. And you see people following that lead everywhere. You see that rulers of countries that previously felt inhibited, they hear him describing journalists as traitors, they start describing journalists as traitors too. It's very, very catching. So, let's have the next slide. Probably some of you have seen this. Okay, for those of you who don't know, this is a still from a pro-Iranian video online. There's lots of them. They use Lego characters animated by artificial intelligence to say rude things about Donald Trump. That obviously is Donald Trump. Now, let me step back a bit, okay? Iran. It's a repressive theocratic regime, okay? Repressive Middle Eastern dictatorships traditionally have not been very good at swaying global public opinion. You may remember during the first war in Iraq in 1990, there was an Iraqi information minister who would stand in front of the cameras and talk about how the infidel American soldiers would all be killed, would all be destroyed, that their insides would be fed to the dogs. And he was talking, to the camera, saying this as American tanks were sort of visible going behind him in the distance. He was very unpersuasive. That has changed, partly thanks to AI. And one of the things about AI is because all the models are trained on mostly Western media output, it is much easier for pretty much anyone in the world to come up with content, with videos that riff, that play with American or Western media tropes, things that people are used to, and put out videos. I mean, these ones tend to have rap soundtracks, so they sound very American. And because they're making fun of Donald Trump, showing his nose growing like Pinocchio, or showing him burning big heaps of money on the war in Iran, they are very persuasive. These videos have seen like more than 1 billion views in the first month of the war. Most of that in the last 2 weeks of the first month. And so it's completely new. We've never seen a repressive theocracy look cool in this way. But if you look closer, you'll see, I mean, the Explosive Media, the company that makes it, they say they're not part of the Iranian regime, but they're operating out of Iran, where essentially you're not allowed internet access or electricity unless the government thinks that you're okay. So they're working for the government. If you look closely at what they're producing, it's actually pretty nasty. Like, Westerners are sharing it like nobody's business, but it portrays the Iranian military as noble and heroic, although only a couple of months ago they were mass slaughtering their own people in the streets for asking for a say in how they were governed. It's full of nods to conspiracy theories, like the idea that Princess Diana of Britain was murdered by the British royal family so that she wouldn't marry a Muslim, or that the Illuminati or the Jews are controlling the American Federal Reserve. And it's full of anti-Semitism. You'll see the Jews depicted as worms in apples, that kind of thing. But it's very, very quick, so if you blink, you miss it. And this is a new force. This is a new force in global media. Oppressive regimes using cool technology to seem cool and to win large audiences with very short attention spans. And that's something that we should be worried about. But I think the principal lesson to draw from it is that America, the world's military superpower, has been held to a stalemate by the government of a medium-sized and not very rich Middle Eastern country, and that the world's cultural superpower has been bested in a propaganda war by a country that still whips women for showing their hair. And for the president who allowed that to happen, the label that he's given in these videos of loser somehow seems not quite rude enough. Let's have another slide, please. So, now this is something I don't say very often, but J.D. Vance was right. Okay, not about most things, but when he came to Europe and said that Europe has a free speech problem, although he's massively hypocritical about this, although he didn't say anything about the worst one, which was Hungary, he does have a point that European countries are far too complacent about their rules. So, in Germany they say, well, we need to have a law against denying the Holocaust because of our history. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but do you need to have a law against insulting politicians? Because Germany has that law, and politicians use it vigorously to shut people down. In the number of European countries, more than a dozen European countries have anti-blasphemy laws. In Britain, there is a law against being grossly offensive, okay? And what does that mean? Nobody knows. But the police arrest 30 people for it every day. This wasn't planned from the top, okay? It wasn't that the government, the Prime Minister said, let's arrest lots of people for being offensive. Just someone wrote a law, someone thought, yeah, that sounds nice because being polite is nice, so we'll put this law down. And then the police discover, okay, now if you're a policeman, it's quite a difficult job, going out there breaking up fights outside pubs, catching burglars. It's difficult. It's hard work. You might get punched in the face. But sitting in your office, scrolling through other people's social media feeds to see if someone said something rude on the internet, whoa, that's pretty easy. And you got coffee here and donuts there, and they've discovered it's the easiest way of racking up extra arrests. And that's why we have to be so careful of laws that try to force people to be polite to each other. Because if you create a right, if you tell people they have a right not to be offended, you're giving someone a tool. You're giving them a powerful tool to claim, to say that they have been offended in order to use the police against someone they don't like. Maybe it's their neighbor. Maybe it's someone from a different political party. And when those tools exist, people will use them. So we should get rid of them. I think it's my final slide. Next one, please. Okay, so this is a happy story. Viktor Orban was in Europe the biggest exemplar of almost all the problems that I've been talking about. Okay, he was a populist. He said that all the problems in his country were caused by immigrants, of whom there are very few in Hungary, by George Soros, a big billionaire who happens to be Jewish, who his posters would always show him pulling strings, and he would do these sort of push polls where he'd ask, the government would send out questionnaires to people saying, it's an opinion poll, what do you think about George Soros's conspiracy with the opposition to bring 1 million Muslims to Hungary to change the demographic nature of the country? Do you think this is a good idea or a bad idea? This was an opinion poll paid for by the government. Of course, the plan that it's asking about doesn't exist, and the purpose of the poll is to make people think that it does. His control of the media, okay, it started with making sure that the public media, the state television, only supported the ruling party. Then he got his friends to buy up all the local media that they could. And then they put them into a foundation under the control of ruling party cronies with a kind of eternal, you can't get rid of them and they appoint their own successors mechanism. He got his friends to buy up the company that had the billboards. So if you wanted to put up a political poster in most parts of Hungary and you're a member of the opposition, you can't because the company that controls it is a friend of Viktor Orban. And yet, after 16 years in power, last month, he lost. Voters kicked him out. Now, why did they do that? And why should we be encouraged by this? The reason they did it is, again, because of all the factors that I've been describing. The reason he was cracking down on the press was in order to conceal the massive corruption of his administration. And while for a time, people did not notice that, they did not detect it. For the first few years, they didn't. But then after 16 years, it was really obvious, okay? This guy's father lived in an 18th century palace in the countryside. His best friend and former footballing partner was the richest man in the country, having been just a plumber before he became prime minister. You would find that when they wanted to privatize land, they wouldn't announce it. There would just be 3 of Viktor Orban's friends in the room, and they would bid nothing for a piece of public land, or €1 or something, and then they would take it. And then they would get European Union farming subsidies for owning the farmland, which they just bought for €1. The level of corruption got so bad that finally, belatedly, the European Union cut off the enormous funding that it gave to Hungary, which amounted to 4% of the economy. It's a gigantic slush fund. This is bigger than the defense budget. And so, there was an economic squeeze. People could see how corrupt the administration was. And then his control of the media couldn't save him. So even though in the election campaign he said that the opposition would bring Hungary into the war in Ukraine and send all the young men to fight in Ukraine, and he said that obviously they were going to bring in lots of immigrants as well, people voted them out, and now there's a house cleaning there. So I think the message there is that if you keep trying, and I've been talking to the opposition and the free media in Hungary for more than a decade now, and they were very dispirited for a long time. A lot of them were saying, we cannot win against this guy because he's so ruthless, he's so dishonest. But I think the message is that eventually the good guys can win. And the reason is because of what I said about corruption. When you see a politician who says that he wants to suppress the media or gag what people say, 9 times out of 10 it's because he's got something to hide, and 9 times out of 10 the thing that he's trying to hide is that he's a crook. Thank you. So I'd be very happy to take questions from anyone about anything. If you put your hand up, I don't know, are you bringing microphones around or something? Okay, so whatever you like. I need a slight rest to do some drinking, but sorry, water, I mean. Yes, there's a lady over there and another one there.
Thank you so much for being here. I have a question about your 2 charts. You mentioned that press freedom is correlated with crook, behavior. I'm curious how there's like a third factor for me, which is like audience attention spans and like willingness to engage and read the news, which you mentioned is on the decline. And I find that like even in the Trump administration, the flood the zone strategy is meant to overwhelm the audiences in terms of how much news there can be about what's going on. Do you find that in your charts, like media freedom is correlated also with, and croniness is associated also with the ability of the audience to understand what's going on, and digest it, or is it just inherently, if there's the threat of media about your croniness, that they're going to be less likely to do it?
Okay. So the short answer is our data can't tell you the answer to that question. The kind of, that little chart that I showed you, that's like a week's work for a guy with a PhD, right? That's a lot of work, and we don't really have particularly good data on attention spans. But certainly, anecdotally, we know that people's attention spans are shrinking. We know that, for example, literacy is a problem in rich countries. That I think the number that I've seen recently is that something like 10% of university students in America, and it's quite bad in other Western countries as well, cannot read as well as would be expected of a 10-year-old. Okay? So there's a real problem with reading stuff. There's a real problem that people are not reading as many books, that the books they do read have shorter sentences, and that very often, certainly in the debate online, people won't read the article. They'll just read the headline, guess what the article probably says, and then disagree with the thing that they think it probably says, even though it may not say that at all. Or sometimes say, why don't you talk about X, which actually is mentioned in the second paragraph of the article. But, they complain about that. So I think it's, I think it's a significant problem, but no, the data crunching we have here is not going to be able to answer your question, I'm afraid. Lady at the, was one at the back there?
Hi, I have a question regarding your last slide. Some people draw a comparison between Hungary and Bulgaria. Can you comment on this? I assume you're very well aware we had recently elections, we have a new prime minister with a little bit of history behind. So yeah, just your thoughts on this one. The
Okay.
happy story or not so happy, I don't know.
Okay, so this is this is the question I dread because everybody in the room knows more about this than I do. Look, I mean, from the view of our our Eastern European correspondents, we haven't decided yet what to make of your new government. We were pretty concerned about the degree of pro-Russianness. We're pretty skeptical of the promise to do something about corruption, but he's only been in charge for a very short period of time, so we haven't developed a leader line on it yet. And when we do, we'll obviously publish it. The reasons for being optimistic about Bulgaria include the fact that you joined the euro a couple of months ago, the end of last year. I mean, speaking as someone from Britain, we didn't just not join the euro. We left the European Union, which was the most foolish, unnecessary act of self-sabotage that the British electorate has done in my lifetime. It's probably made us 4 to 8% poorer so far than would otherwise have been the case. And it's very hard to rectify because voters don't like to admit that they were wrong. So I think, you're on the right path in terms of being part of Europe, which is a great club to belong to. You're effectively citizens of 27 countries, all of which are democracies, all of which are by world standards rich. You can live and work in any of them. People can go, they can bring back ideas, they can bring back money. You should have great opportunities here. Would it be better if your head of government was a bit less fond of Vladimir Putin? Yes. Yes, it really would. But I'm hoping that you'll work that out.
Last question.
Thanks so much for talking. We see in the United States that the Trump administration is weaponizing the infrastructure, say the FCC, to kind of control who owns what media companies, whether to approve certain deals or not. Or we can think about CBS News being essentially dismantled by the Elsons, who are Trump supporters, and TikTok. Looks like it's likely to be handed over to supporters of Trump as well. How do you see that in this context, and where do you see it kind of going?
Okay. I think, so there was a question about the Trump administration's attempt to lean on the market to ensure that a higher proportion of media outlets are owned by people who are friendly to Trump. And of course, to make media owners friendly to Trump by making it clear that he rewards his friends and he punishes his enemies. I don't think these people actually like Trump, right? But they fear him and they know that he's very transactional. I'd say it's very worrying what he's doing. One reason for being slightly optimistic is that he thinks very, very short term, okay? He does not care what happens after he's president, so long as he doesn't go to prison, right? He's not trying to do this long term. It is famous that when people come to him and say, we have this real problem with the budget, that the Social Security, the pension fund's going to run out of money in 2030, and he's like, why should I care? I won't be here. He literally says that. So it is possible that someone else might build on the very bad precedents that he has set. But he is a very unusual character. There's no one else on the right or the left who has the degree of charisma that makes people sort of accept his leadership without question, no matter how often he changes his mind on important promises and policies. I think it would be quite hard for a future leader to replicate what he's done, given the constraints of the American system. But nonetheless, I'm it is flabbergasting and terrible that we are even talking about it. No president in my lifetime, probably my parents' lifetimes, has ever done anything like this before. The people who came before him, Harry Truman, I don't know if you remember him, famously was so eager not to profit from having been president, not to give any paid speeches, write any book that people would buy because he'd been president, not to accept any job that people offered him because he'd been president, that when there was a reunion in Washington, okay, of former presidents, and he, as an old man, wanted to drive back there from the Midwest, okay, he couldn't afford to fly. He had to drive in his old car to go there. Those were the standards of the 1950s. The standards today are as different from that as it is possible to be. This man has made billions in office, and I hope that's not repeated. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Do we have time for one more, or we're done?
Let's do one more.
Up to you.
One more for the crowd.
Okay. So is it one there? Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Do you still believe that the media is able to make one dictator to fall down?
Can the media make a dictator fall down? Sometimes, yeah. It's not easy. The one guy's got all the guns and all we've got is pens and laptops. But sometimes, you can make the other guy look ridiculous. And the reason for thinking that what we do is effective is actually to look at how keen these guys are to stop us from doing it, okay? So if you see the example of the video that Alexei Navalny made about the palace that Vladimir Putin built with the results of a $1 billion bribe that he took, okay? And it showed footage of this really very tasteless, enormous palace with its sort of lap dancing room and jacuzzi and all this kind of stuff. And he put it out there, and it got, inside Russia, it had millions and millions of views within a week. And Putin was so frightened of this, and so frightened of the man who was putting out these ideas, and who was making this really straightforward case that this guy, he says he's protecting you, he's actually robbing you, right? That's the central argument that Russians need to hear about Putin. And Putin was so frightened of this guy that he killed him, okay? Yes, but there will be more Navalny's, and there's only one Putin. So, yes, it does happen. People write stuff, and when the mood changes, suddenly that moment when Ceausescu, when the crowd turned against him, the moment with Marcos in the Philippines where people were, broadcasting the tape of him begging his mistress for oral sex over the public administration sort of, loudspeakers in the universities. When people start to laugh at these guys, when they start to see them for the crooks that they are, sometimes that's enough, but it's a never-ending fight. So, thank you all very much.